Hello and welcome to today's webinar on searching the Great Migration databases on AmericanAncestors.org. My name is Ginevra Morse. I'm the Vice President of Education and Programming at American Ancestors and New England Historic Genealogical Society. I will be your moderator for today's session. This program is brought to you by the Brew Family Learning Center. American Ancestors and New England Historic Genealogical Society, we are a nonprofit organization supported by our members and donors. We provide resources and expertise in nearly all aspects of family history, and we're pleased to offer such programming for our members and friends around the world. Your instructor for today is Lindsay Fulton, Vice President of Research and Library Services here at American Ancestors. Lindsay is a nationally recognized professional genealogist and lecturer who joined American Ancestors back in 2012, first as a researcher and then as a genealogist. Lindsay is the author of 3 portable genealogists applying to lineage societies, the United States Federal Census 1790 to 1840, and the United States Federal Census 1850 to 1950. Soon to be and it's now revised to that 1950, so that's a new revision that's just out recently. She is a frequent contributor to the NEHGS blog Vita Brevis. She's been featured in the Emmy-winning program Finding Your Roots: The Seedlings, a web series inspired by the popular PBS series Finding Your Roots with Henry Louis Gates Jr. And before coming to American Ancestors, Lindsay worked at the National Archives and Records Administration in Waltham, Massachusetts. She holds a BA from Merrimack College and a master's from the University of Massachusetts, Boston. And her areas of particular interest and expertise include state and federal censuses, New England, Ireland, and New York research, with a focus on lineage society applications. So for anyone with 17th century New England colonists in their family tree, the Great Migration Study Project is a go-to essential resource. Created and researched by Robert Charles Anderson, the series provides authoritative genealogical and biographical sketches for more than 20,000 individuals who immigrated to New England between 1620 and 1635, with detailed references for many more who immigrated between 1635 to 1640. Many of these sketches are available on our website as searchable databases. So today, Lindsay will kind of provide you some tips, some tricks, and some strategies for making the most out of these important resources and really how to navigate and how to search them on our website. At any point during the presentation, feel free to type your question into the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen. We'll address those at the end. There is no syllabus for this session, but this event is being recorded, and starting later today, you can freely go back and review any of the content from the presentation on our website as well as our YouTube channel. So again, if you missed something on today's first listen, not to worry, you can always go back and review the presentation later. All right, so without further ado, I will turn things over to Lindsay.
Thank you, Ginevra, and welcome everyone to today's discussion about the Great Migration and the Great Migration Study Project. So this is one of the premier databases that we have, or scholarly projects that we have at American Ancestors. Like Ginevra was saying, it was started by Robert Charles Anderson, and it's really looking a real deep dive at the European colonists who are arriving in New England between 1620 and 1640. You see a little example of that right now. So we're going to dive in to why it's important to use these study projects and the best ways to utilize the databases on American Ancestors. So something to know about American Ancestors that I'm sure you're all kind of aware of already is that we have an incredible commitment to scholarship. And that's through a variety of different publications that we publish on a consistent basis. So we have the New England Historical and Genealogical Register. We've been publishing that since 1847. That comes out 4 times a year. And that's looking at, originally it was looking at families in New England. We've expanded beyond that, looking at those families either talking about, I don't know, there's 4 John Browns who arrive in Essex County at the same time. They're about the same age. How do I know which John Brown's the right one? There might be an article like that. There's transcriptions of vital records and church records, there's discussions about terminology, like the difference between a husbandman and a yeoman. That's the type of resources that you'll find available in the register. We have the American Ancestors magazine, which we also publish 4 times a year. And then there's Mayflower Descendant, which we do twice a year. Mayflower Descendant is very similar to the register in that it's very scholarly, footnoted, vetted by professional genealogists. The Mayflower Descendant is looking at folks who are either Mayflower passengers and their families, or families that are related to those folks. And that comes out twice a year. We also publish family histories through the Newbury Street Press. And we're also committed to creating how-to guides that talk about methodology and record compilations. Ginevra mentioned at the beginning that I was the author of a few of the portable genealogists. We have a multitude of those at this point, which describes how to do record research. So, if we're talking about the federal census, it's when those records were created, why they were created, how best to use them, strategies, things of that nature. You might also be aware of the how-to guides we have, like the New England Handbook, or how to do genealogical writing. Those are just some of the examples of publications that we have coming out of American Ancestors. So in addition to those items are study projects, and study projects are commitments to scholarship about a particular group of people that we're able to kind of put a box around. So it's a deep dive to look at those individuals. So the Great Migration Study Project is looking at immigrants who arrive in New England between 1620 and 1640. So that's the box that we've drawn around that group of people. You have to arrive between that period of time, and you have to arrive in that particular location. And I'm going to go into more depth about what the Great Migration Study Project is later on in this chat. But some of the other ones that we've been doing are the Early New England Family Study Project. That's looking at New England families who are here between 1641 and 1700, again, looking specifically at New England. We have the Western Massachusetts families in 1790. The box that we're drawing around that is you have to be enumerated in the census in 1790 in the western part of Massachusetts, in the western counties. And those are going to be sketches of the heads of household. So again, you have to fit into that box in order to make it into that study project. And then there's the newest one that we have is the early Vermont settlers in 1784. Again, looking at the first settlers of Vermont and New England in the northern frontier up to the year 1784. These are highly researched, intensely researched projects. They're vetted. They are reviewed by by other genealogists on the staff. So these are kind of they are the gold standard genealogical research that we have coming out of American Ancestors. So why do we use them? Well, I just told you, they're the gold standard. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. There are people who have been researching these folks for we've been around for 177 years. The early New England settlers were some of the first folks that our members and donors were interested in. So we don't want to reinvent that wheel. We want to build on what's been done before. Robert Charles Anderson has been doing this since the 1980s. And research and record sets have become more available and studied even more. So we just want to really just stand on the shoulders of those that have come before us. These study projects are fully cited, they're sourced, they're vetted, and they can direct you to other resources that exist. So it could be that one of the directors, whether it's Robert Charles Anderson or Alicia Crane Williams, it may be that they've researched someone to a point. They can't do exhaustive research on everyone, but they might have researched someone to a point, and they might be giving you some ideas of where you can further that research along. And I'll give you some examples of that as we chat a little bit later on, but it can direct you to other sources that exist. There's a lot of footnoted material there that you should be looking at. And it can help you to identify known issues with certain families. So like I was saying before, there might be a few John Browns that arrive in Essex County at the same time. They're around the same age. How do we figure out who they are? The Great Migration Study Project identifies that problem, and we'll talk about how they were able to tease apart those 4 different people and why they feel strongly about that. So an important tool for you to use and to build upon with your own research. So specifically, the Great Migration Study Project is directed by Robert Charles Anderson. He's been doing this since 1988. Again, we are looking at the folks that arrived between 1620 and 1640. They're genealogical and biographical sketches of those individuals. They are arranged by year, and I'll go over, the next slide goes over how exactly we're arranging that. But we're starting in 1620 and we're going all the way to 1640. There are 14 published volumes. There's a newsletter that Bob did. There's 25 volumes of that. We've done tours and education programs. I'm doing obviously an education program right now, but Bob's taught his as well as other members of the American Ancestors staff. And then we have online searchable databases, which will be the core of what we talk about today. So in terms of published volumes, the most recent addition to this is the Great Migration Directory. So I'm going to actually start from the bottom. So when Bob was first starting this project, he was looking at those families arriving in New England, 1620 to 1640. He starts with the Great Migration newsletter, and then moves on to the Mayflower migration. This is looking at, then goes on to the Pilgrim migration, which is the 4th bullet point there, and that's looking at immigrants who arrive to Plymouth Colony between 1620 and 1633. Those sketches are going to look all of these look very similar. The look and feel is very similar. It's head of household and information about them, and then also their family. So it's going to start with folks that are arriving between that period of time. The Winthrop fleet is kind of the second iteration of that, looking at folks that arrived during the Winthrop fleet. There's about 700 families that arrived during that period of time. That's covering 1629 to 1630. Then we start to kind of ramp things up, and that's when the volumes start becoming even bigger. So that's looking at Great Migration Begins, covering 1620 to 1633. There's 3 volumes covering those families. Great Migration covers 1634 to 1635, and there's 7 volumes. So that just goes to show you how many people have started to come after 1633, right? There's a huge influx of families that are coming during that period of time, because there's 7 volumes that cover that family. If we're going to get all the way to 1640, that's when we start thinking about the Great Migration Directory. So the Great Migration Directory, the top one there, that's the most recent scholarship that's published on the Great Migration. That's covering 1620 to 1640. That's a directory. So it's more of an index, and it's telling you about the best scholarship that is available for persons that are arriving during that period of time. So that's going to cover all of those years. That is only available in book form. All of the listings that are here, the published volumes that are listed on here, only some of them are available to be searched online. That's the Great Migration newsletter, the Great Migration Begins, and then the Great Migration. And we've starred them for you. Now, why are we interested in this particular time period? Well, and this is going to go back to what I was just saying about the increase in volumes, right? So this is the time frame that we're looking at, 1620 to 1640. So you can see this is how many passengers are arriving during those years. 1620 is the arrival of the Mayflower, right? There's 100-ish folks that arrived during that period of time. So we see a steady flow of people who are coming from 1620 to 1628. Then you'll notice that spike. And then that spike is the Winthrop fleet in 1630. And then you'll notice another huge spike in 1633. Remember, we were talking about those 7 volumes. Well, in 1633, there's something that happens in England. William Laud, who was the Bishop of London, he was a notorious persecutor of the Puritans. He was actually elected elected to be the Archbishop of Canterbury in 1633. And he's put in that new position. When he's put in that new position, he's persecuting even more of the Puritans. So we see a large influx of folks that are coming during that period of time. Then we see the drop off in 1640, and that's because that's the beginning of the English Civil War. So the period of time where we see the greatest amount of people arriving in New England from Europe, that's coming between 1633 and 1640. The people who are included in the record, again, they have to fit into this specific box that we've created. The person needs to have arrived in New England between 1620 and 1640 and appeared on a record. That's the most obvious way for them to be included. But then there's these other 2 bullet points that get a little bit of a gray area. There can be either a direct or an indirect implication of arrival, or the appearance of an immediate family member of a person known to have arrived. So again, this is the gray area. So the example that I'm going to give here is of Richard Bowen. Now, Richard Bowen is not on a record in New England before 1640, but he still made it into the Great Migration Directory. And the reason for that, I can explain on this next slide. So Richard has a bunch of kids with his first wife. We don't know her first name, but he has a bunch of children with his first wife. Alice is his oldest child. You'll see her, yep, right there. She's born about 1620. So he is Alice, then he has William, Sarah, Ruth, Obadiah, Richard, and Thomas. All of these kids come to New England. We have records of them in New England after 1640. So he's arriving at some point with all of his kids. We know from other records that Alice marries Robert Wheaton, who's here. He's born in 1606. So she marries Robert Wheaton, and they have Joseph Wheaton in 1641. And we know so we have a record of Joseph Wheaton being born about 1641. So if all of that is true, if we start doing some math, that means that Alice and Robert Wheaton had to have been married in 1640, which means that the family arrived sometime in 1640 or slightly before then. So that means that he gets to be included. So that's an example of some of these gray areas that exist. We have some record sets that that logically put the person in New England at that period of time. Now, if you're lucky enough to have an ancestor that's included in Great Migration, you get all sorts of information about them. Bob tries to include all of the things that are bullet pointed here. So we get the person's, if he knows, we get the person's place of origin, their first residence, where they were moved to. So they might have arrived in Essex and then moved to Salem, for example. So that all of that will be included. If they return back to England, that will be included. Their occupation, church membership, whether or not they're a freeman, their education level. That education might be that they own books, that they signed their own deeds or probate. Or they might have, I don't know, they might have had a Bible in their possession. So that might be what is fulfilled with that education bullet point there. If they held office, they were surveyor of highways, if they were governor, selectman, whatever, all of that's going to be included. Their estate information is extensively covered. It's an abstract, it's not the full deed, but you get an understanding of what property they owned and where it was, who the abutters were, all of that lovely, juicy information. We get genealogical information like birth, marriage, and death. We get the names of their spouse, their children, sometimes who the children marry. My favorite 3 bullet points are these last 3. That is associations, comments, and bibliographic note. That's to help you if Bob wasn't able to figure out exactly who that person was and where they came from. So in some cases, you might get information in this comment section or the associations that say, Richard Kinsman identifies this Robert Nichols as a cousin. We don't know how, but he's a cousin. So something to think about later on. So that kind of comment will be included at the end of the record. The same is true for or the same is true for the comment section. So the comment section might say something like, there's 4 John Browns that are arriving in the same place, the same time. They're the same age. We've only been able to establish 2 of them. And then there's these other 2 hanging around. But Bob will admit that in his comment section and make you aware of that's still a genealogical issue that they're having with that particular immigrant. So in that case, it will be called out. It's incredibly important as a researcher to get that information, because then you know that there's still a question rather than it being solved. So that's why I really like that comment section. So I'm going to show you an example of what one of these sketches looks like. So here's just a sketch for John Aswood. So you can see all of this is always designed in the same way. So it's always in the same order. So you get origin, migration, first resident, removes, return trips. All of that happens in that beginning section there. Then you get information about occupation, church membership, and so on. At the end of the sketch is where you get information of birth, marriage, death, and then information about the children. But you'll see here that an extensive part of this sketch is about the estate. You'll see that there's an inventory taken of John Aswood's estate. His will is included, and all of the people who are mentioned. And what's lovely about this is that he's actually mentioning property that he still owns in England, which is lovely, which can help us exactly identify where his origin is. So this is the type of information that you'll see in a biographical sketch for one of the people who's included. And you'll also see, I was mentioning before with education. So it says, Bob says here that he signed his will. And in the inventory, there's mention of 2 Bibles and a parcel of books. So obviously he's educated, he can read, he can write. So here's the second page. And this is actually a shorter, I would call this a shorter sketch for some of one of these Great Migration immigrants. So the second part is the genealogical information. So with his first wife, they have Samuel, and Samuel's numbered. And then with his second wife, they have Hannah, and Hannah's numbered. Now, they try to give as much information as possible about where the person's born, if they're married, and where they died. But then you'll also notice the second section here about associations. So it mentions that there's a brother, James. He comes a few years later, settles in Roxbury. He leaves a will in 1653 that bequeaths to his brother, John. Lovely little neat little package there. But the association is given, and the lovely part about that is he comes a few years later. So this might be someone who does not appear in the Great Migration directory or the Great Migration series for that matter. So this James might not get his own sketch or his own entry in the directory, and this might be the only place that we see him in the Great Migration Study Project. So that's why it's important for us to do a good search of the record collection to find if our ancestor appears. Now, the sources used for Bob to create this collection are a assortment of passenger lists. That's both original, published, and reconstructed. He uses lists of Freeman. He does a methodical search of notarial records, town records, vital, land, church, as well as colony and court records. There's also a few journals and letter sets that he will return to. But what he does is he does an exhaustive search of all of those items in order to identify all the right people that need to be included. So 1620, 1640, that's our box that we're drawing around everyone. But we're going to look at all of these sources to try to identify who those people are. So that exhaustive search allows for fewer people to fall through the cracks, because you're not just looking for your one person. Bob's looking for everyone, right? So when you go through and you do this methodical search, then you pick up people who would be potentially lost through the cracks if you were just looking for one individual. The other thing that I'm going to talk about really quickly, you might have noticed in the example that I was showing that there's some citations in brackets that just have letters or numbers kind of associated with them. It's just a very quick citation. I'm going to show you how to figure out what that is referring to later on. So this key to titles, I'm going to show you what that means. All right, so let's do some searching. So this is what our current homepage looks like right now. But what we're going to do is we're going to go up to that search bar and we're going to click on there, and then we're just going to go to search. And that's going to bring us to all of the databases that we have. So if you were to search right now, if you were to put in a name and dates and years and whatnot, it's going to search all of the databases that we have, which is perfectly fine if you're interested in all of the material that we have. But if you're interested just in Great Migration, we really need to narrow that down. So one of the best ways to do that is under the category section towards the bottom here. And if you click on the category section, you can select Great Migration Study Project. And when you select that and then do a search, it will just search what we have available for Great Migration. And it's going to search just, remember those starred items that we talked about earlier? It will just search those record sets. So that's Great Migration Begins, the 3 volumes covering 1620 to 1633. It covers Great Migration, which is the 7 volumes that cover 1634 to 1635, plus the Great Migration Newsletter, volumes 1 through 25. So when you select that, that's the databases that it's going to look at and give you hits for. Okay, so now let's do a search. So if we've searched for one of the most famous immigrants to come during this period, John Winthrop. So if we search for John Winthrop in the Great Migration Study Project, so we have that category selected. If we search for him, we get a few results. We get 693 results if we search for John Winthrop. And that's because the search that's being done is of all the sketches that are written. So if Robert Kinsman, if the Robert Kinsman sketch has any reference to John Winthrop, that's going to be a hit that comes up. So if you're interested in just John Winthrop, like the John Winthrop, the famous guy. So here's an example. So Andrew Alger's sketch, you'll see that John Winthrop is mentioned in there. So that's going to be one of the hits that comes up. So if you don't really care about Andrew Alger, I'm sure he was a nice guy, but if we don't really care about Andrew Alger and we're just interested in John Winthrop, then we have to tell the search feature to do something different. And the way to do that is to select from this drop down that allows you to choose Great Migration Begins or the newsletter or just Great Migration. So we know that John Winthrop comes in 1633. I'm sorry, 1630. So we want to make sure that we're we're looking specifically there. So we want to look at this Great Migration Begins. So we select that. And when we select that, it also gives us this little option, this little pop-up comes up. It allows you to put in the page, which I don't expect you to know the page number, but it has this lovely little feature that says feature name only, and you can select that box. And if you select that box, it will then search only for the sketch of John Winthrop and other spellings of the word Winthrop. So you'll see also below there that there's 2 record sets that come up, or there's 2 hits that you get. One is for John Winthrop, one's for John Winter. And that's because the computer is trying to think of alternative names for the spelling of Winthrop. So that's why you get 2 hits. But in this case, we're interested in John Winthrop. And if we want to look at what the sketch actually is, we go to this view image. And when we view the image, it brings us to the first page, the first entry for John Winthrop. So like I was saying before, it's all going to be set up in the same way. It has this, origin, migration, first residence, occupation, church membership, so on and so forth. If something is not included there, it means that we don't know. So if one of those headers is not included, it means that we weren't able to figure it out. So that's why it's kind of skipped over. So we want a page. This isn't obviously the only page for John. There's most likely going to be more information. He's kind of a famous person. So if you page right, this little arrow here, then you can see the next page. And that brings you to offices, estates, and so on. And what I would suggest doing at this point is kind of keeping track of how many pages you're going through. And that's especially true if you want to print this or make a PDF. And I'll show you how to do that in a moment. But you want to look at the whole thing. So we want to look at the offices that he's held. Now we're to that biographical section or genealogical section that gives us information about his first wife, the names of his children. He had a few kids. He also had several wives. You'll see their 4th wife. Joshua was born to the 4th wife there in 1648. So we want to keep going until we get to the end. So you're at the end when there's a new name that's included. So John Whitfield is listed here. That means that we've gone to the next entry. So if we're keeping track, there's 5 pages that are specific to John Winthrop. So if you want to print that or create a PDF, you can do so by selecting print range. And when you do that, it will ask you how many pages that you would like to print. Now, at this point, you need to go back to the first page. So where John Winthrop first shows up, the title, the first page. And then you're going to put where it says number of pages, you're going to put 5. And then you hit print. Now, you don't have to print it when you hit print, but print will bring up the other possibility of creating a PDF. So when you hit print, this is usually the selections that will come up after that, and see where it says destination. Destination will list all of the printers that you have available to you in your home, or if you're at a library, it will give you those options, but it almost always has this option to save as PDF. And if you go to save as PDF, you actually hit the button that says print. But when you hit that, then it will save it as a PDF, and you can save that wherever you'd like. Another interesting feature of that page is to go to the transcript section. So when we were looking earlier at image, now we're going to look at transcript. Now the transcript is just going to lay out all of the key information that's included in that sketch. So we see here John Winthrop, the birth and death information is given, the origin, the ship, the removes. And if you scroll down, it will also give you all of the people who are listed along with John in his sketch. So you'll see George Cleave, Robert Jordan, William Scadlock, and so on and so forth. So if you don't want to look through if you don't want to read through all of the sketch, you should. They're excellent. But if you don't want to do that and you're just trying to see who might be included, that's a way to do that. Another nice element of this, and this is actually included on all of the pages that you would arrive on when you're looking at a sketch that's interesting to you, is this citation at the bottom here. And you can hit copy citation and you can include, so if you're writing something and you want to footnote it, you can just hit that copy citation, cut and paste, and it's all done there for you. You don't have to worry about periods and commas and parentheses. It's all done for you. If you keep scrolling down on that page, it also gives a description of what you're looking at. So it's a description of the collection. So in this case, this is Great Migration Begins. So it's describing what this collection is. So it's covering 1620 to 1633. There's some nice little tidbits of information in here. See, it says, as a rough estimate, about 15% of the immigrants to New England arrived in the 14 years from 1620 to 1633. 85% are coming after that. Very interesting. There's also where you can click to download the introduction. And I would recommend reading the introductions because Bob did a really nice job of explaining what he was looking at and why he was looking at that record collection. But a really essential portion of this is the key to citations. So if you click on one of those and you download the introduction, it will bring you to this page, which is talking about how he constructed a sketch, the methodology behind it, the strategy behind it. Again, very important to kind of understand why he was interested in, he's not related to all of these people. He's related to some of them. But why is it important to look at everyone from 1620 to 1640? Well, when you start looking at them as a group, you start to figure out some patterns. They might have actually known each other back in England. In fact, most of the time they did know each other back in England. And that can help us to start to figure out origins for other people. There's also so many historical implications as to, looking at the entire group rather than the individual. But the individual brings you to the larger group, right? So that's why it's important to kind of understand the methodology and the strategy behind why Bob is doing what he's doing. In addition to the explanation for the sketch, though, is this key to titles. So the more and more you use Great Migration, the better you get at all of these shortened citations. So there's a few like TAG, it's commonly referred to as tag. That refers to the American genealogist. But I don't expect you to memorize all of them. And there's many times where you have to look up what the reference is to. So like in this case, if he's including Bailey, that's referring to early Massachusetts marriages prior to 1880, written by Frederick W. Bailey. Now that's a resource that you can go and find once you look at that citation that's included in the sketch. So as I was saying before, it leads you to other resources. That's one of the things that the Great Migration Study Project does. So here's just a quick example of kind of showing it side by side. So if we go back to the John Astwood sketch, you'll see some of the record sets that are included, or some of the references that are included here you might not know. So at the end of this offices, for example, it says NHCR. So NHCR, if you look at the right, this is the key to titles on the right. We're comparing them side by side. NHCR refers to the records of the colony and plantation of New Haven, 1638 to 1649. It's 2 volumes. They were published between 1857 and 1858. But you'll see that there's a reference to a page number here, so you know exactly where you're going if you want to view the original source for that information. So you can do that with all of the abbreviations that are included in those little parens there. So the examples that we were just showing, that was from Great Migration Begins and Great Migration. So that's the volume sets, the 10 volumes that's covering the individuals that are arriving between 1620 and 1635. The newsletter is looking at, it's a little less formal. It's looking at research in progress. It's giving you some historical context. It's giving you literature reviews on genealogies that were published about these families. There's strategies. There's explanations of terminology. So some things that were commonplace in 1633, the word might not be the same word that we use today. So the newsletter might cover something like that. So I'm going to give you some examples, things that I've used before. This is one of my favorite ones, and that's establishing birth order. Now, this is not a conversation when you have meticulous birth records recorded for an entire family. That's easy. That's, chronological order. This is the order in which they were born. Establishing birth order, this explanation, is giving you a strategy for how to deal with that when you're using other record sets. So when you're relying on a will and maybe marriage records for all of the children, how do you determine who comes first? This explanation from this article in this newsletter will help you to understand how to go about that. Bob also wrote one about the number of years that are usually between children. So it's usually 2 years. So that's important to understand. So if someone has 10 kids, it's probably a 20-year time span that you're looking at. And that just understanding that it's usually 2 years can help you to determine if you're missing a child, if you might be conflating 2 children because there's not enough time between all of those kids to be born, or maybe there's a second wife. So all of this is important when you're trying to understand the full family. The same as becoming a Freeman. What does the word Freeman mean? This is an entire article about that. How long it took, how old you had to be, how much land you had to own, how many there were in 1634 versus 1636 versus 1639. Yeah. So if you're interested in that historical context behind what it meant to be a Freeman and how you actually became one, this is where you start. There's also literature reviews, which I cut off one of the last ones on this page. It was a literature review of a book that Bob wrote, which I found comical. I'm sure he did not write the review of his own book. But there's a literature review at the end that gives you a review of the material that's been created and how reliable it is, and who the person was looking at and from what time frame and what geographic area. Now, to search those databases, to search specifically for that newsletter, you can do the same thing that we did before when we were trying to find John Winthrop in this little drop down. So in the drop down, you can select Great Migration Newsletter, volume 1 through 25. And then when you do that, you can search by name. You can do that if you'd like, but you can also search by keywords. And I would recommend searching by keyword in this particular instance, because you use the newsletter so often for those reasons that I was saying before: historic context, understanding terminology, understanding a place. So in this case, we're looking for the place Ipswich. That's the best use of your search functionality for this particular record collection, is using the keyword search. And I would definitely select article only. If you want it to be in the actual article title. If you don't, and you want it to be in the description, then you want to make sure that you uncheck that box. So here, for example, is a focus on Ipswich. So it's talking about the settlement. So who's arriving, when they arrive, what that group of people looks like. Are they coming from the same place in England? There's a discussion about the first church of Ipswich, when it's established, who the minister is, et cetera, et cetera. So if your family is coming from or settling in Ipswich, this is an important part of the research process, is for you to understand that place. Okay, so now we're going to talk about using some advanced search strategies for this collection. Sometimes it can be a little daunting because Robert Charles Anderson is a very good genealogist. He's like world renowned, you know? So sometimes folks are thinking, well, he's done everything. And in some cases that's true. But there are instances where you can use what he's done to move your research a little bit further down the line. And the way to do that is to think about using the collection that he's created in a unique and creative way. So that's generally using what we call the fan method. And I'll talk about that in a second. But so because you want to know about the community that your ancestor belonged to, because the community can help you to answer a lot of questions that you're trying to answer about that person, whether it's where they're coming from in England, or what their occupation was, or what life was like for them, or the name of their first wife. All of those questions that you can come up with, the best way to answer them at this point, because you've done usually an exhaustive search using those easy records, like a birth record or a marriage record. This particular method will help you to kind of expand your search field so that you can start to answer some of these more intense questions about your ancestor. So that's, if we're going to effectively do this, that's looking by just the location. And there's a search field for that. You can search by a location and an origin, and you can do that using the keyword field. You can search just by a surname. If your ancestor has a unique name, you might want to just search by the surname and see what comes up. The same is true for the ship name. You might be interested in all of the people who are arriving on the Mary and the John. Because if your ancestor is on that ship with all of those people, most likely they know some of the people, if not most, of the folks who are on that ship with them. And they're probably coming from the same place. And they're probably, the religious leaning is probably exactly the same. So it's really important to know who all those people are as well. So you can search that way. You can search just by the ship's name. So just a quick explanation. I mean, I could talk for hours about doing fan research, or sometimes we call it cluster research. And that's looking at, this is a research strategy that you employ once you've already looked at all of the low-hanging fruit for your ancestor. That's when you start looking at family members. And I don't necessarily mean, I mean like extended family. So that's aunts, uncles, cousins, even second cousins sometimes. That's expanding that cluster. So looking at family members. Same with associates and neighbors. That's what I was saying before, like everyone on the ship, they probably know each other. They're associated in some way. In fact, just the fact that they're on the same ship together, that makes them associated with each other. So it's an important group of people to look at. So when you're doing cluster research, that's who you're looking at. You're no longer looking at just your ancestor. You're looking at the family associated with that person, folks who are associated with that individual. That can be folks on the same ship as them, people holding the same political office as them, them arriving in the same place. And then the same goes for neighbors. So who's arriving in Ipswich? What are their names? Where are they from? Are they coming from the same parish? Do you know where they're coming from in England? So all of this cluster research can help you to answer some of your more difficult questions about your ancestors. One of my favorite things in the world to do is search by location. And that's because Well, it's because I tend to do a lot of research where we're trying to answer a very difficult question. And that's usually what we have to start looking at that expanded cluster. So we're looking at neighbors, looking at associates. And the best way to do that is by location. So if we're going to just search by location, there's two ways to do that. We have the location field here. And if you search by the location field, one of the tricky parts about our databases is that it's going to search, so in this case, we're looking for Wiltshire. It's going to search for the word Wiltshire in the field of location in the sketch, if that makes sense. So if you search in the location field for Wiltshire, you're going to get some hits. So if we do that search, we get 7 hits. So we see the Ludlows are from Wiltshire, England, but you'll see here on the right where it says immigration date 1630, and then it says location. So when you search in that location field, it's just looking in what an indexer put in that location field as well. If Wiltshire shows up anywhere else in the sketch, it probably is not going to come back with a result. Regardless, having 7 hits on Wiltshire is good. We are very interested. If your family is from Wiltshire, you are very interested in who these Ludlows are and how they might have known your ancestor. But I want to encourage you to search by both location and keyword. So if we go back to the search field, you can also search in keyword. So if we go to, I think it's called edit search. If you go to edit search, you can take out location. So where the example currently is Boston, Massachusetts. You can go under where it says keyword and you can type Wiltshire. And if you do that and hit search, you get different results. See, 1 through 38. And you'll notice that the Ludlows are no longer there. Now we're looking at Mayhew. You'll see the origin for Mayhew is Wiltshire, not location. So see how location up here is Medford, Middlesex, Massachusetts. This is just some of those like deep nitty gritty things that a computer does. So you have to kind of think like a computer sometimes. So even though it makes sense in a search that like a computer would look at the whole sketch and just tell you wherever Wiltshire shows up, that's not always what the computer is doing. Sometimes it's going to be looking just in that particular field that you've told it to look in. So that's why it's important to look at keyword and location. So if we do keyword, we see 38 results. We're also interested in these folks. So we want to know who Thomas Mayhew is just as much as those Ludlows. Now, one of the hidden gems of this Great Migration Study Project is a map feature that I'm going to show you in one moment. So, and the way to get to it, I'm going to walk you through. So you go to the publications drop down and you go to where it says the Great Migration Project. You click there, it brings you to this lovely screen, which is the home screen for the Great Migration Study Project. It talks about all of the things the Great Migration is. And then it also has these lovely little links on the side. So you could search the databases there. You could look at publications, articles that have been written. If there's any additions and corrections to something that's already been published, that's where it shows up. So that's a good place to check kind of periodically. But my hidden gem is this parish map. So if you click on the parish map, and this is what you would use if you're trying to figure out origin, and you don't have that origin for your ancestor already, it brings you to this parish map. So the map itself is showing you where most of the Great Migration immigrants came from. So most of them are coming from the eastern part of England, Norfolk, Suffolk, Essex, Kent, even like Lincolnshire. Most of them are coming from that particular area, right? So that's just a general sense of where everyone's coming from, at least who we know. These are known origins that are included on here. But if you know something about your ancestors, so I'm going to keep talking about Wiltshire because we're working on a project right now that is specific to this location. So you can tell it, You can tell the map in this little drop down where it says locate by, you can do locate county. You can do that drop down and you can pick Wiltshire. And it will show you where that area is. So it's brought me to Wiltshire. In fact, I zoomed in a little bit, but it's showing me that parish area. I'm sorry, that county, and then all the parishes that are in that area. So you'll see like Stratton, St. Margaret, and Blunston, St. Andrew, Cote, Swindon, et cetera, et cetera. And you'll see the white lines here are the borders of all of these areas. Now, the key on the left side there, you'll see that there's a magnifying glass with a plus, a magnifying glass with a minus, and then the little cross there. All of those are very important to pay attention to because the map will do whatever you've selected. So see how it's a little bit darker where the magnifying glass is with the plus? That's because I've selected that. So every time you want to zoom in, so the plus mark means zoom. Every time you want to zoom in, you have to draw a square. So the square that's currently kind of highlighted there around Wiltshire, that's where it's going to zoom. So every time that you draw a square and then let go, it's going to zoom in on that particular area. So right now, that's what I've asked it to do. If you want to zoom out, you have to make sure you've selected this little magnifying glass with the minus mark. You select that, you again draw the square, you let go, and it zooms out. If you're trying to move around on the page, so say that you're interested like at the top here in Hannigan, no, wow. Whatever that word is that I can't seem to say right now. So if you're interested in that area and you wanted to pull the map up, you would select that cross mark, and then you can select that area and then move with your mouse, and that can control where the map is actually selecting. So those are kind of 3 key elements of this particular map to pay attention to. Okay, so if you're in Wiltshire and you're interested, so the people we're interested in right now are from Highworth. We know one person is from Highworth. We know that that person is related to someone else that arrives in New England, but we can't find them in Highworth. So what that means to us is we need to start looking at all of these surrounding parishes, because most likely that's where our person is that we're trying to identify. And you can search, and if you select the little, magnifying glass with the plus, you zoom in, you can see all of the parishes that are in that area and where and how big they are. And you'll notice also that Wiltshire borders Berkshire. So we got to deal with that whole situation. So we've got another county involved. But to us, the most important part is these parishes, because that's the level at which church registration would have been done, is at the parish level. Another fun feature of this, so you'll notice the ones. So see how it says Broad Blenson and Stanton Fitzwarren, there's a 1 there. If you click on the I, so on the left key there, so if you click on that I for information, and then you click on this Stanton Fitzwarren where it says 1, it will pull up that there's 1 immigrant that is known to come from that area. And then if you click on list immigrants from this parish, it'll bring you to another page, or you can select locate person, and it will show you everyone that they've identified where they're from. And you can click on that person and it will bring you to where that person is from on the map. But if you were to click on show me all immigrants from this area, it'll bring you to a page that looks like this. So it will tell you the person's first name, the last name, where they're from, the year that they immigrated, and then where they went. See how it says New England town, Ipswich? There's also an option for you to just list all the people. So if you click up here on the top where it says list all people, if you click on that, it will show you all of the individuals with known origins who are included on that map. And it gives you a very easy, digestible way of kind of manipulating that data. So you get first name, last name, the county, the parish that they're from, the year they immigrated, and where they went. And you can play around with this data. So if you wanted to see like where everyone from Ipswich, like where if they arrive in Ipswich, where are they from? Are they from the same place? So it seems like a lot of them are from Essex in Barking, and they're all coming in 1638. So that's kind of a hint for us to start looking in that area. So everything we've talked about today is our databases. But as I said before, some of these are only available in print. All of them, however, are available in print, and they're available on our bookstore. So you'll see the Great Migration Directory. That's something that's only available in print. Same with Puritan Pedigrees and Mayflower Migration. Puritan Pedigrees and Mayflower Migration are more historic context behind that individual, that group of people who are coming. Mayflower Migration is specific to Mayflower, obviously. And then the Puritan Pedigrees is talking about the relationships that were created in England that then kind of see themselves migrating over to New England. The most important book that I think Robert Charles Anderson wrote is Elements of Genealogical Analysis. So that's talking about how and why the Great Migration Study Project is the best method for identifying information about your ancestor. It's casting a large net and it's a lot of work. But if you really want to answer a specific question, that's the best way to get it done. And Bob kind of lays it all out, or he does lay it all out in Elements of Genealogical Analysis. It's not a huge book, so it's not a huge read. I find myself going back to it over and over and over again for information, for understanding strategy, understanding case studies, returning to basics, like all of the things that you sometimes need to do for yourself when you are, banging your head against that brick wall. This can be a very helpful compendium to kind of keep you going when you're dealing with some more difficult genealogical issues. And then finally, you'll notice when I was talking about all of the Great Migration series, there's been a full treatment of all immigrants who arrive up to 1635. But we have not gone beyond there. And that's mainly because a huge amount of people show up starting in 1633. So we're very happy to announce that we have someone taking over the project, in direction from Robert Charles Anderson and Bob Anderson, and that's to Nathan W. Murphy, who is going to take on the 1636 to 1638 part of the series. So this is something that we hope to see come to fruition in the very near future. He's the new genealogist on staff, and we're excited to see the new volumes that come out from the project.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Lindsay. Before we get to your questions, and we do have we'll make time for questions. I did want to tell you about some upcoming programs. First of all, you can still register for our winter stay at home research program coming up next week. This is a 3-day intensive online experience, and through one-on-one consultations with our experts, lectures, group exercises, you'll gain the necessary skills and knowledge to advance your family history research, especially from home. And also join us in March for our 5-week online seminar on the basics of early New England research. We'll discuss the settlement of New England, how to locate and use records, and of course, strategies for breaking down brick walls. And you can learn more about these and all of our upcoming events at americanancestors.org/events. All right, so let's get to some questions. If you have something that you'd like to ask, go ahead and type it into the Q&A panel. So Lindsay, one question, so if you've traced your ancestry to say the mid 1800s, is the Great Migration Study Project going to kind of meet you there, or are you going to have to do some additional research to kind of link your family with these sketches?
You're going to have to do a little bit more to link yourself with these sketches. So I would say that, if we're looking at immigrants that arrived between 1620 and 1640, these are heads of household too. So these are not going to be younger individuals. So like, an 8-year-old arriving in 1640 is not going to most likely make it to the Great Migration Study Project as its own sketch. So it's going to be, established families that are given a sketch. And then the children of those people will probably be born. I mean, I'm trying to think of the latest that they would have been born, probably 1660, 1680. So that'll bring you to, if there's information on the children, it would bring you maybe to 1700. So I would say that that's probably the limit of how far we could go with the Great Migration Project to linking to your own tree. So you would have to get back to someone, who was living in the early 1700s to kind of link up with the Great Migration series. But the good news is, if you have folks in New England, so if you're back to 1830 New England, the record collections for that area are very good in comparison to the rest of the country. So it's definitely doable. I would definitely take advantage of the class that we're going to be. I would take advantage of education programs that we've done, and try your hardest to get them back to 1700, and then kind of link up with Great Migration from there.
And we have a few questions, is Rhode Island covered? So is Rhode Island part of New England during this period?
Yes. So the New England states that are covered in this are going to be, because it's stopping in 1640, there's not a whole lot of migration to the area that becomes Vermont, for example. Or even, Vermont, we'll say, by this time frame. There are folks that are in Maine. There are folks that are in New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and of course Massachusetts at this time. But yes, it's going to cover folks from all of those areas. You will see a few references to folks in Long Island, but they're usually arriving first in New England, and then they're moving beyond that area. So like I said before, we're putting a box around people, 1620 to 1640, arriving in New England. So that's the first element of how you get included in this collection. So that's kind of the first thing to look for. If they move outside of that area after arriving there, then they could also be included.
Great. Can you talk a little bit more about the Great Migration Directory? People are asking, I know that my ancestor came between 1636 and 1640. What are they likely to find in the directory?
So the directory is going to, one of the examples that I gave actually at the beginning, which of Richard Bowen, that is an entry from the Great Migration Directory. So it's the name of the individual, the year that they immigrated, the place that they immigrated to, so the first place that they arrive, and then I believe the name of the ship is also included if that's a known piece of information. So all of that will be included there, kind of written out. Yep, lovely. So you see, we don't know where Richard Bowman is from. He arrives in 1640. He comes first to Salem, then he goes to Weymouth, then Rehoboth. After that, you'll see in parentheses citations. So in this case, Richard Bowen is covered in a genealogy, most likely, called Richard Bowen of Rehoboth, Massachusetts, and His Descendants. It's published in 2011. And then there's also a reference to him in a tag article. That's The American Genealogist. It's in volume 76, page 263 to 278. Now, when you're looking at, if I've looked at 100 of these, so that's, I know that that's what tag means. There's a key to titles for all of these collections that are under the umbrella of Great Migration. So there's a way to get to the abbreviations that's at the beginning of each of these volumes. So the references that are given are Bob's recommendations for the best scholarship that exists about that person already. So, and it's the most up to date. So you'll see 2011 is included here, which actually was a while ago now. It doesn't feel like a long time ago, but I guess it was. But that's the recent scholarship that's done about Richard Bowen. And then also the tag article is going to be the most recent journal article that was written about that individual. So it's the most up-to-date scholarship. So if you want to learn more about Richard, that's kind of the first place to start. Or we wait for for Nathan Murphy to write a sketch about Richard Bowen in the future. I mean, he is starting with 1636 to 1638, but he'll get beyond that eventually. But that's what you're going to find in the directory, is kind of the most up-to-date scholarship about that individual.
And also, just to clarify, do you need to be a member of American Ancestors to access these databases?
Yes. So this is information that's available to members only.
And a few questions as well about, again, to clarify, are these only English settlers? Do you see folks from Ireland, other European countries, other areas outside of Europe included in these sketches?
Yes. So it's not going to include Native people included in the sketch. So that's kind of the delineation there. So it's people arriving in New England who did not live there previously from 1620 to 1640.
All right. Well, it looks like that's about all the time that we have for questions. I know that there are several more. I do want to let you know that if we didn't get to your question, or maybe you missed something from today's presentation and you want to kind of go back and listen to it, this has been recorded. It will be available on our website and YouTube channel. So you can always go back and freely look through that. I also want to mention our chat service. So you can chat with a genealogist. Maybe you have questions about, well, what exactly is the difference between a freeman and a husbandman? Is this person included in the Great Migration Directory? Other kind of, or how do I read this really hard to read handwriting from the 17th century? Definitely avail yourself of our Chat with a Genealogist service at americanancestors.org/chat. Again, free, open to the public. It's available Tuesday through Saturday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern Time. And we do have extended hours on Wednesdays, 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. Someone also mentioned in the comments that, yes, our library will be closed for much of this year, starting at the end of March. But our chat service is very much still going strong. So if you have reference questions, if you have questions on, again, anything that I've just discussed, definitely take advantage of this free service. So thank you again for joining us. As you leave the event, you'll have the opportunity to fill out a survey and give us your feedback as we continue to expand our webinars and online offerings. Any and all feedback is extremely helpful and appreciated. This free webinar was made possible by the generous support of members and friends around the world. Please consider making a gift to American Ancestors to keep these programs free and to create to create others. And if you'd like to access more how-to resources or learn about upcoming online educational programs, please visit us at americanancestors.org. Best of luck in your research, and I hope to see you at our online programs in the future. Goodbye for now.